Welcome to Young Earth Anonymous, where we're putting together a 12-step program to help cure people of young Earth creationism. We're going to start by developing a series of questions for young Earth creationists, or for you, that you can pose to a young Earth creationist, and they're questions that young Earth creationists can't really answer very well, or if they come up with an answer, it'll be very unsatisfying, or at the very least the answer will only be one possibility, which really is the goal, to cast doubt on the fact that young Earth creationism is the only answer to the questions that it attempts to answer. So we're going to ask these questions as we progress through Genesis 1 and later on some other texts. And the first question today is, when was the earth null and void? That's the question. You can ask a young Earth creationist, when was the earth null and void? And then kind of a follow-up question to that is going to be, what does it mean that the earth was null and void? And I'm going to explain now why I think that's an important question. So here we are looking at Genesis 1. Verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So that heavens and the earth is a merism. It means God created the things at the very top, and he created the things below, at the very bottom, the earth, and everything in between. It's not an enumeration of two things that God created. It's basically saying that God created everything. Now the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. That's Genesis 1 and 2. So the question is, when did this happen? So how would we answer this question with Scripture? Now, one way to look at this is, you're going to say in the beginning, but this, I believe, is possibly before what you might be thinking if you were raised as a young Earth creationist and you're raised in a place where you're never allowed to question young Earth creationism. You're confused by the idea that this might be before what you think of as the beginning. So let me demonstrate a little bit. If you scroll down, you are going to see that each day starts with what's marked in yellow here, and God said, and each day ends with, I'm on day 6 here, and there was evening and there was morning, the 6th day. So the 6th day starts in verse 24, ends in verse 31. Then we go up, the 5th day starts, and God said, in verse 20, and ends in verse 23, morning and evening, 5th day. The 4th day ends and God said, starts and God said in verse 14, ends in verse 19. Verse 9, and God said, verse 13, there was the 3rd day. Verse 6 to verse 8, the 2nd day. Verse 3 then, and God said, the very 1st day. So in the very literal sense, in a chronological sense, in the very basic sense, the first day, the first creative day of creation starts in verse 3. So what is in verses 1 and 2? The beginning, that's where God created the heavens and the earth. And the shape of the earth, the state of the earth was that it was without form and void. So when was this? There's 6 creative days. We look from the form of the text. They each start with, and God said. They each end with the marker of evening, and that marks off that day, listing that specific day. Day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Verse 1 and 2, in a very easiest reading, happens to be before those days. What is the state of things before they were created? So if you're a young Earth creationist, you're thinking, well, they were created, they couldn't have existed before that. And that's a paradigm that was never challenged probably for you. And we're gonna challenge that today. So those 6 creative days start in verse 3. So what existed before that? God created everything. The heavens were created and the earth was created. And there was the state of the earth was it was without form and it was void, or null and void, I think is in the King James. So you might say, okay, what is this talking about? Is this really saying what existed prior to those 6 days? You really can't dispute the 6 markers for those 6 days. It's hard. It would be kind of a hack on the text to say that verses 1 and 2 are part of the very first day, right? But you might, other people, young earth creationists, I think, would say, well, actually, this is a summary. Verses 1 and 2 are providing a summary that God created everything, and then the 6 days are providing some of the detail on that. That's one way you could look at it. The problem is that you can't look at it that way, because the summary and God created the heavens and the earth. If I was going to summarize those 6 days and say God created the heavens and the earth, and they were great, they were glorious, right? The summary would include the kind of sentences that occurred in the text, that God said that it was good. That would be the summary, right? The summary here is that the earth was without form and void. It doesn't make any sense to say that verses 1 and 2 are summarizing all of creation when the summary includes the description that occurred prior to the creative days. So if the summary says the earth was without form and void, then that doesn't get fulfilled by the following verses from verse 3 to verse 27 or 31. So it can't really be a summary. What it seems apparent to me is that it's actually describing the state of the earth. We created everything. There's no question of that. Ancient people didn't wonder if God created things like our modern atheists might. So there's no question, there's no explanation, this was God, it wasn't something else. In the beginning, unexplained, uncritically stated, God created everything. Zoom into the earth. But the earth, when we get to it, was without form and void. So just looking at the text, this is telling us that there's markers for the 6 creative days, and verses 1 and 2 appeared before those days, and it's giving us the state of the earth before those 6 creative days. So if the days are literal, which I think we'll later look at that when we get into the next question, how long were verses 1 and 2? And what time frame causes a problem for you? So I don't think you can say that those verses are part of day 1. I don't think you can say it's a summary of all of creation, because the summary is very inadequate to say everything God just created was without form and void. So it's the state prior to verse 3 where God first created God's first creative day. So how long? When was that? If verse 3 was 6,000 years ago, let's say, how long did verses 1 and 2, 6,000 years and 1 second prior? Do you have any reason from the text to assume it was only a second? When does it become a problem? When do you start calling people idiotic? If it's more than a second, if it's 10 minutes, if it's 1,000 years, if it's 10,000 years, if it's 100,000 years, what if it's 1,000,000 years? What if it's 13 billion years? When are you switch from thinking logically about this to just calling people names? So I think it's evident to me that it's a good question to ask, when was the earth null and void? I believe the answer is that the earth was null and void, was without form, and void, without shape, prior to the 6 creative days. How long was the earth null and void? I don't know. You don't know. Not from the text. You might have other things that might hint that it's longer than 6,000 years ago. But if you're dogmatic about that the beginning was 6,000 years ago, you have no reason to be from the text. So a follow-up and a secondary question to when was the earth null and void is, what does it mean to be null and void? If the earth is null and void, if the earth was, in the ESV here, is without form and void, what does that mean? So it can't mean uncreated, right? The Bible just stated in verse 1 that God created the heavens. He also created the earth. The earth is created, but it's without form and it's void. What does that mean? They're Hebrew words tohu and bohu. So let's look at where those words are used and how it describes other things, and then we'll come back here and see that if we can see what was the state of the earth prior to the 6 creative days. The first one we find, most of the time, we find the one word, tohu, used without the other word. In this case, in Deuteronomy, he found him in a desert land and in the howling waste of the wilderness. So it's describing something that's useless, describing something that's inhospitable, right? The waste of the wilderness. That's one example. 1 Samuel 12:21, and do not turn aside after empty things. Same word. Empty things. The text, the explanation of the word says in this context could be translated worthless things that cannot profit or deliver, for they are empty. They are worthless. They don't provide any benefit. That's another example. Job 6:18, the caravans turn aside from their course. They go up into the waste and perish, right? It's not just going somewhere that's not, somewhere where you can't live, somewhere that's inhospitable. So those are some examples of how the word tohu is used. What if they're used together? There's only 3 examples. Genesis 1:2 is one of them. Another one is Jeremiah 4:23. I looked on the earth, it even has a similar context, and behold, it was without form and void, same thing, tohu and bohu, and to the heavens, and they had no light. I looked on the mountains. Okay, so the earth, he's looking on the earth, and the earth has mountains even when it's without form and void. And behold, they were quaking. He looked on the hills, so the mountains exist, the hills exist, but it was without form. What he's saying is without form and void. And all the hills moved to and fro. The fruitful land was a desert. All the cities were laid in ruins. So what's described here without form and void is something that is worthless, something that is inhospitable, something that should be fruitful, something that might have been fruitful, but it now is a desert, maybe through mismanagement or something that happened to it. It doesn't describe something that doesn't exist. It doesn't describe something that hasn't been created yet. It's describing something that lacks purpose. It lacks usefulness, right? I thought I had another example where they're both used. Yeah. Isaiah 34:11 is another example. He shall stretch the line of confusion, right? That's the word tohu, over it, and the plumb line of emptiness. So here confusion is a different aspect of it. Maybe chaos. It lacks cohesion. It lacks meaning. It lacks purpose. Something that lacks those things are tohu and bohu. So let's jump back to Genesis 1:2. So we've talked about the question of when, and I think the answer is before the 6 creative days, and someone would have to really hack the text to say otherwise. We don't know how long it was in this shape, but we can get a clue for what that means. The earth was without form and void. The earth lacked purpose. It lacked meaning. Let's take another planet. Let's say Mars. Mars has hills. Mars has I don't know, maybe some kind of atmosphere or maybe less of an atmosphere. I don't know. Mars apparently used to have water. It has all the same kind of things the planet has. Maybe a planet that has life on it, but it's not doing anything with any kind of meaning. And the meaning that the text here is driving us toward the creation of man. That's the meaning and the purpose. So the earth at this point has no meaning, it has no purpose. Now, we come from a scientific materialist age. We think the only kind of truth that matters is scientific truth. So if the Bible's talking about something important, it has to be talking about physical created things. And we're kind of assuming, oh, this is talking about how the earth was created from how it was physically created. The earth here, I think what's being indicated is that the earth wasn't, the creative days hasn't happened yet, and we'll talk about those, but the earth doesn't have any meaning or purpose. All the hills are there, the sun is there, the sunrise, the sunset is there, all the rivers are there, all the trees are there, all the things are there. They don't do anything, they don't have any meaning yet. God's about to give them meaning in those 6 creative days. They're without form, they're without shape, they're without purpose, and they're empty. They don't provide any fruitfulness, like a desert for someone who's thirsty. So when was the earth formed and void? Before the 6 creative days, I think, is the best answer from the text. And if you're going to say no, that it was at the very first day, the very first second of the first day, then you have to break the formula and God said as the start of each day. If you're going to say that verses 1 and 2 are a summary of all the days, then you have to explain why the summary summarizes the whole event of creation with this totally inadequate description of everything being formless and without contents. So know that the earth was without form, without meaning, without purpose before the 6 creative days. But it existed. It was there. We don't know how long. We have no reason from the text to insist it was a second or that it was a billion years. But it's wrong from the text to tell someone that they're double-minded or they're an idiot if they're saying that it's less than a billion years. And we can also tell from the other uses of the word that there isn't a lack of substance, there isn't a lack of existence that was the state of things. The Spirit of God wasn't hovering over nothing, right? We're being told that the earth lacked meaning and purpose. It was without shape, not necessarily in a physical sense, in a purposeful sense. It wasn't fruitful. And it might have been in a physical sense, but it doesn't have to be. If something is chaotic, it's without shape, and it's without form, and it's empty. And the next 6 creative days is what God is going to do. He's going to provide the shape of things, and then he's going to solve for the emptiness of things by filling things. He's going to form things, and then he's going to fill things. So that is the first question we have for a young earth creationist.